Welcome to Research Methods. Today we are talking about institutional review boards and informed consent. IRB, as I've said, is Institutional Review Board, and the National Research Act of 1974 is really what established the modern IRB as we know it. Each university has one, as do most medical centers or any institution in the US that conducts research, or they might outsource it to an external institutional review board. IRBs assess risk to human subjects in studies, so if you're conducting a study that involves people, then you should be running your research by your IRB before you do that study. Risk is an experience of harm or discomfort anticipated in research. Minimal risk is when the probability and magnitude of risk is not more than what one would experience through the course of their daily life or during the performance of routine physical or psychological examinations and tests. Minimal risk is kind of presumed in research, and some studies will be approved by the IRB with exempt status if the risk is really low. The IRB review process aligns with the Belmont report, which we learned about in an earlier lesson. Just as a reminder, the Belmont report delineates three principles: respect for persons, which includes a concept like autonomy, and in order to exert autonomy, our participants need to know what they're actually going to be engaging in. So we need to inform them of procedures and a host of other things through an informed consent process. Second principle is beneficence, so doing right by our participants, doing good and not doing harm. And we do that by assessing risk and benefits. And then lastly, justice, which we can ensure through selection and treatment of subjects in a way that um, considers who we're engaging in our research. Are we doing this equitably, making sure that we're including a diverse range of ethnicities and or races in our research, so that it's representative of the general population and our findings can be applicable to uh, to to most people in our population. So usually that means not just white individuals, since they tend to comprise the majority of the sample for many studies. An IRB protocol requires the following to be described in your application. So the nature of the research, the purpose of the research, the methods that you'll employ, that includes recruitment and study materials, all your procedures. You'll also need to outline what the advantages and disadvantages of participating are for the participants, because your IRB is trying to assess the level of risk, in part anyhow. And you'll also outline your informed consent procedures. There's stipulations about how you would need to go about doing this, and we'll display that in a moment. You also talk about in your application how you will maintain the privacy and confidentiality of your participants. And this is especially important if your study is pertaining to sensitive material or sensitive procedures of in relation to your participants. They just would not want for their personal information or knowledge of their involvement in something that's sensitive to be known by other people. And all of this information needs to be synthesized and submitted to an IRB before you conduct the study. So you will be conducting a study as part of your involvement in this research methods course. Hopefully you know that. If not, well, now you know. You can find some information about that in your syllabus. And before you start your study, you'll need to think critically about the ethical principles that relate to your research. And as we've discussed, part of that process includes thinking about multicultural ethical concerns. You'll want to make sure that if your study focuses on a minority population, that you're taking into consideration what the needs are of that population, what the norms are of the population, and being culturally responsive and being knowledgeable about your participants. And you'll also want to include an informed consent form as well as fill out an IRB application for your study. We will not formally be submitting the application to Fordham's IRB, but we want for you to get the experience doing that, especially if you go on to do other research later. So when we're talking about informed consent, we're talking about giving participants information about the research that they'll be engaging in. So that means they should be well informed about the purpose of the study. You might recall we talked about the Tuskegee syphilis study. This would kind of contradict the way that things had been done in that research, where participants were not aware of the fact that the research would take anywhere near 40 years. They didn't know that they would be in a syphilis study to begin with necessarily. There are just a number of issues there. So we want to sidestep that and make sure that we are respecting the autonomy of our participants by giving them the liberty to choose to participate or not based on the real facts of what the study entails. So you'll tell them what they'll be doing, the expected length, 6 months, not 40 years, the potential benefits and risks of their participation, any of the details related to confidentiality, voluntary participation. They should know that they can cease their involvement at any time. And you'll also include your contact information and the IRB's contact information in your consent form. This is just a checklist of some things you'd want to make sure you have covered in your informed consent. If you'd like to review it in detail, you can hit pause. IRB forms, if you're ever submitting it formally in this institution, can be accessed at my.fordham. And that concludes our lesson.